Hey, and howdy. Welcome to the NLP Alumni Podcast, where we gather members from the Nexus Neighborhood Leadership Program to talk about where they are in the current moment and what world building looks like for them. I am your host, Baki, and today we are having a conversation with Maria Bertimer and Carolyn Spinski. Maria lives by collective inclusive liberation and brings these words to life by spending her time in skill-sharing sessions with her friends. Carolyn enjoys accountability, celebration, and solidarity. She lives by curiosity, struggle, and joy, and brings these words to life by bringing people together in community. We start our time by giving thanks. Dakota, the original people of this land, and Anishinaabe, the keepers of the seven fires. The way of the mind brought to the red, black, yellow nation by the white nation would bring danger to the whole earth. And this time, there will be a new people who will emerge from the clouds of illusion. They will retrace their steps to find the treasures that have been left by the trail. The stories that have been lost will be returned to them. They will remember the original instructions and find strength in the way of the circle. Their search will take them to the elders, and the new people will ask for guidance. But many of the elders will have walked the path of their souls to the starlight. Many elders will have forgotten their wisdom, and they will not be able to help. Some remain silent because of their fear. Some of the elders will be silent because no one has asked them for their wisdom. The new people will find trust in the ways of all things. In the circle, they will no longer need the selfish voice of the ego, and they can begin to trust their inner voice. Wisdom will once again be found in dreams of the night and of the day. The sacred fire will once again be lit. The light-skinned people will be given a choice between two paths. If they choose the right path, the seventh fire will light the eighth fire, and final fire of brotherhood and sisterhood and theyhood. If they choose the wrong path, remaining on the path of the mind, then the destruction they brought with them will come back to destroy them. The people of the earth will experience much suffering and death. Ashe, Asheo. That is the context, that is the foundation to which we will be coming into this conversation. And I hope it finds you well, the people in this room, as well as the listeners.
Oh, my beloved Maria and Carolyn. Who are you? Where do you come from? And what are you learning about your place here in this current moment?
My name is Carolyn Spinski. I use she, her pronouns. Who are you? It's an interesting question, honestly, because I've been thinking lately a lot about how I used to really cling to certain types of identities. Like I had this laundry list of like, I'm a lesbian, vegan, anarchist, fill in the blank, you know what I mean? And trying to really let go of some of those like identity markers as like safe spaces of like, okay, I know who I am. I can be secure in this particular location. And not that I'm not any of those things anymore, but trying to hold with more expansiveness the fact that like I'm legit a different person than I was when I started the sentence, you know, and just like holding that capacity for uncertainty in a more joyful way. Some things about me that I think feel important. I am a cis woman. I'm a white-bodied person of overwhelmingly predominantly Eastern European descent. I am the daughter of an immigrant father from Poland. I am someone who has come to live on Dakota land relatively recently, but have kind of chosen St. Paul as my forever home. I am a person who loves words and language and communications. I can nerd out on some words, I'm sure, at some point later. And I also am someone who really loves movement, like movement of my body, movement in the organizing collective sense, movement in nature. Like I love watching the river. I love watching, wind go through the top of a tree. And then finally, I think also someone who is working to be still and not always be speaking, not always be acting, not always have that inclination to be jumping in and doing all the things, which I think is also tied to some of the things we're trying to undo as white body folks. So I'll pass it to Maria for a minute.
Hello, I'm Maria. I use she, her pronouns. I think that I met you, Carolyn, around this time last year. I was just thinking, probably. I don't know. I think we had like a one-on-one around this time. October. Yeah.
Yeah. And then we ended up at Ilsa's housewarming party
Together.
Yes. Epic rainstorm for this housewarming party. Anyway.
It was, amazing, epic brainstorm. I was like, of course, we're in a very similar friend group. Like, how did I know? But anyway, I am Maria. I use she, her pronouns, as I already said. And I am a cis white queer woman and who lives now in what is now called St. Paul, Dakota land. I grew up near La Crosse, Wisconsin, so not too far from here, in Bluff territory. And I think like you, Carolyn, when I decide that a place is home, I really like root down into it. And so I find the most joy and kind of well-being by being in community with other people. I think community for me feels like creating transformative spaces. So thinking about like the neighborhood leadership program, that felt like a transformative space. I think I work at Inquilinos Unidos por Justicia, also called United Renters for Justice. And I think what I've realized in that space is I feel most like at full capacity when I'm kind of doing more cultural organizing work. So like I'm the communications director. So I don't know, when I'm like really sitting down with somebody and we're talking about their story and talking about how they want to share that publicly, or when I'm in large spaces with groups and we're thinking about art. And so, for example, at IX, we just built this with Full Moon Puppet Show. They came to us offering to work on a huge puppet, and like being in those like thinking spaces and thinking about what the puppet would look like, or like building the puppet together. I can't explain it, but I think it's like when we're fully autonomously creating something that feels out. I mean, we're always in the system, but that feels outside of the system. I think that's where I feel most grounded.
I agree. My favorite organizing spaces are when, the discussion is just bubbling and there's laughter and creativity, and that's just like my heaven, honestly.
Me too.
I mean, I love being outdoors. I love being in nature, but I mostly love being around other human beings and feeling that crackle of like connection. So I really hear that. I'm also a huge puppet fan. I'm like old school, like started organizing in the like anti-globalization years of like the late 90s, and puppets were like the thing. So yeah, I'm still into the puppets. I was also a radical cheerleader. That was a thing. Do you remember that? Oh my God, MK's laughing. I feel so old right now. That's so fun. It's like taking the like concept of cheerleading and turning it into like anti-sweatshops and like it like body positive. Like we had one about like armpit hair and how fucking sexy armpit hair is. See, sorry, I did the F word. But yeah, so that's the kind of things that I find a lot of joy in. And just to go back to the like, what are you learning about your place here at this current moment? I'm really, I feel like kind of like you, Maria, I do a lot of support. I'm a very behind the scenes person for the most part. And so I think it's like a really interesting, delicate balance, especially as a white-bodied person, to be someone who is ostensibly communicating or putting things into the world that not to use a problematic word like on behalf of, but to be working alongside folks and being kind of entrusted with their voice or their vision is like a huge responsibility. And yeah, I mean, I think I feel that on a daily basis. And so trying to figure out, my place in this moment, using my skills in a proactive way, but not letting, I don't know how to finish that sentence. Mason can edit that out.
To answer that question, what are you learning about your place here at this current moment? And I totally agree with you. The person who was previously in my role at IX, she tried to be in almost 0 pictures that were taken and like not have her name on almost anything. She was also a white woman and is a white woman. And I've tried to follow in her footsteps. And I think that there are some good things and some bad things probably from that. Some good things are that I'm not doing that thing where as a white person, I'm just like stepping in and speaking for a group that I'm not part of. But I think it also means that then I don't have to take full responsibility for my actions. So yeah, what am I learning about my place here at this current moment? I think that I'm in a place right now of learning about the depth, the role of conflict in organizing and movement.
So juicy.
I know. When I first went into organizing, I was like, oh my gosh, it's going to feel good all the time. And I was like, everybody's going to be so nice and it's going to be so happy. And it's like, no, it's actually like getting into the conflict is really where we transform. So I think my year has been about, I am most of the time feeling uncomfortable. And I think that's important. Yeah, it looks like y'all have some stuff you want to share.
Well, I really just wanted to practice active listening and pull out even more wisdom and more insight from you all. So I was wondering if I could get a definition from both of y'all about space, because we talk about space a lot, but I would love to get a concrete definition of what space is. And then I would also like a definition for us to work with when we talk about the word transform.
In what, like in all the ways that I was using space, for example? I mean, I think of space as like a physical area in which people come together. So like this room that we're seated in. I think holding space is kind of like this embodied way of showing up where it's like recognizing that I'm not the only one in this like 4-walled space and like noticing what else is occurring around me and taking the time to like notice and respond. I think for me, that's really what I think of as space. And then transformative, I really think of like our current systems. So like white supremacy, patriarchy, different forms of oppression. I tend to think of especially like what is now called the US, but also like colonization. And so I think transform means like asking ways that we can create processes and a world where people are not oppressed and where people are free. So I guess transformation for me is about true freedom.
So space to me is about like opportunity and like the capacity to have opportunity together. There's also like a relational part of it that space is inherently about, like what is my proximity to all of you in all of the different ways. I feel like space is also kind of about consent, and how we're agreeing to be together, because a space can feel really great, like this space right now, or it can feel like other spaces that have similar ostensible characteristics, but don't feel the same way. Yeah, space is also about feeling. And I also really love sci-fi. So I'm just like spinning off into lots of little sci-fi moments in my head. Like, I like that. What was the other one? Transform. I think transform to me is more than change. It's about an evolution or a shift in like consciousness that there's not the potential to go back again. Transform is really about like something that really deeply shifts. So yeah. And I think it's visceral and it's embodied and it's somatic in a way that like something like policy change, quote unquote, is very different than transform. And I think we use it too liberally, honestly. I mean, we use a lot of words too liberally. But I think transform is definitely one of them. Yeah.
Something I want to practice and multicultural, diversity, biodiversity, race diversity in spaces is after every question asking white folks, then how does your whiteness inform your response? So I guess I would just like to ask, how do you think your whiteness informs your definition of space, your definition of transformation?
I'm gonna need to take a moment to think about that. That's it. I'm so glad you asked that.
Yeah. I'm excited with this too. Oh, I mean, I think that certainly my definition of space is informed by I'm always given space for the most part. Just the way that systems are set up. I feel spaciousness more readily in the world as a white body person, as a cis person, as a kind of straight presenting person. Some people laugh at me when I say that. But yeah, I think that definitely, like, I have a positive like reaction to the word space. And I think that that's very much informed by privilege and whiteness. And transform. I think there's probably a lack of urgency there for me, just because it feels, if we're being super candid, like the world is set up for me in a lot of ways. And so I think this notion of transform feels a little bit more cerebral and spiritual, as opposed to like, no, we need to change everything right now in a really deep, visceral, like deep systemic way. So I think I also bring a degree of, I'm moving my body in a kind of serpentine fashion. So like a degree of softness, I think is, yeah.
When I hear the word space, I think of it in terms of ownership and taking space. Like, okay, taking back land, taking back our museums, taking back churches, and like the spirituality that comes with that type of organization. And then just being Black, queer, and trans in the cities that is on fire, in a world that is on fire. When I hear transform, and as a Scorpio, right, I've been thinking a lot about death. And like, how do we transform how we see death? How do we transform who dies? And then even transformation versus the word transition when we talk about ancestors, when we talk about space, when we talk about losing people too soon. I don't know if there is a transition into the spiritual realm or truly a transformation that must take place, a sense of alchemy. And then I'm not sure, as a Black person whose body and blood keeps this country going, as a Native person whose body and blood keep this country going, I'm like, transform, is alchemy a survival skill of mine? Do I choose to alchemize? Do I get to choose transformation? Or is it just that sense of urgency where things must transform in order for me to keep breathing? Hard act to follow.
Glad I went first that time.
I know. You gave me the mic and I was like, just listening. Wow. I don't really know if I have more to add to that. I think right now I'm really just thinking about what you said. Yeah, I think like what am I learning about my place at this moment is probably what is my role as a white cis woman from an upper class background in transformation. And hearing you talk about that sense of urgency and kind of like what I heard from you at least was like when you think about transformation, it's almost like something you have to do. Whereas for me, it's like, and as you talked about, Carolyn, it's not necessarily something I feel as urgently I have to do. It's for me, it comes more from like a moral place, less of a like survival, a place of survival. Not that you said that necessarily, but so I think what I'm learning is obviously there's a role for me. There's a role for everyone in transformation, but how can I truly listen and follow? And where are places that I need to lead? And where are places that I need to follow? And when is it like very iffy and mushy gushy? So, and that kind of circles back to that idea of like, when are the times that I need to be in front of the camera?
Just planting the seed. I hope that you and others can be in front of the camera when it comes for surveillance, when it comes time to be like, who did this radical action that might cause legal ramifications. Just to putting a seed out there. Like just in case for your boy. I think as a transition, I would love to speak about, I think we really want to invite you to reflect on the following passage again. The light-skinned people will be given the choice between two paths. If they choose the right path, the seventh fire will light the eighth fire and final fire of brotherhood and sisterhood and theyhood. If they choose the wrong path, remaining on the path of the mind, then the destruction they brought will then come back to destroy them. The people of the earth will experience much suffering and death.
Thank you, Becky, for returning to this very important passage and the seven fire prophecies, or the seven fire prophecy that our Anishinaabe relatives bring forth to us, and tasked us out to really grapple with. Carolyn, Maria, I would love to ask you, do you see yourself in this passage?
I mean, the thing that resonates with me most immediately and really stood out was this notion that if they choose the wrong path, they might remaining on the path of the mind. And I think that that's something, this notion of remaining in the mind rather than the body, not that those two things are, mutually exclusive, but I think I've spent a lot of my life feeling very disembodied. And I think that that's, one of the traits of white supremacy culture, that we stay in the thinking mind as opposed to the feeling body. And we become so completely dissociated from fucking everything else around us, that this notion of pointing to the path of the mind as the wrong path is really interesting and instructive to me, especially over the past 4 or 5 years, where I've really been investing in, because being in my body is uncomfortable for me, kind of to your point, Maria, that I don't like being in my body. I like being in intellectual realms more so. So I think that that's really, because also being in your body is feeling pain, like feeling mental pain, feeling shame, feeling guilt, feeling all of the things. And so I think that's the path that I've been trying to walk more intentionally. And that to me is like the only way that we walk back all of the destruction we've done, or turn around or transform, is we have to be able to feel it first and be able to be in relationship with other people, because if we're not in our bodies, we're never in relationship in any sort of authentic way. So that's what comes to mind most immediately.
Yeah, that's beautiful, Carolyn. My job is definitely a cerebral one, and I too like to sit in the cerebral space. And I've been pushed time and again to really get into my body, which, as I was saying, is hard. I walked into this having experienced some food poisoning last night, as an example, so I'm a little tired. Thank you, NK, for the delicious tea. I'm also thinking about, I like to think that there is nuance between the right and the wrong path. There's so much nuance in this world, and the thing that I work on constantly is seeing the nuance. Because I, like, as a white cis woman, I think I've been brought up in a world where I've been told to not see nuance. But I've been thinking about the right path. And, here it brings up fire. And the right path may also really hurt. Yeah, if they choose the right path, the seventh fire will light the eighth fire. What do those fires look like? I think about the fires we saw here in the Twin Cities in 2020 after George Floyd's murder, and that was really hard. And really, yeah.
I'm still thinking about transformation, right? I'm still stuck there. I think about Robin D.G. Kelly and how Robin D.G. Kelly, this amazing scholar, communist thinker, he talks about how, like, there's, the only promise we have, right, is the promise of struggle. That's the only thing that's promised to us, right?
Yeah.
And that brings me to Dr. Joy James, right, who's this incredibly brilliant Black communist thinker who talks a lot about this. I think who talks in a similar strain or around, like, there's no promises. You know what I mean? Like, maybe the only thing that we can get out of this, out of our struggle, out of our efforts, our labor, right, is to transmutate, right? Is to experience change in our makeup and who we are, right? That the violence that we come across inside of a predatory democracy, which this is, so we see it everywhere, is that maybe in our struggles, in our desire to practice what I've come to learn from her is agape, or another way that you could see it is revolutionary love. Something that I think we can see ourselves being able to achieve or being able to get out of this is that transformation or that transmutation, that capacity to shift the way that we see, be, and do, to shift the way, or to maybe see things and feel things and live into things differently, right? She's talked about breath before, like maybe it changes the way we breathe, right? Shallow or deep, and that might be the only, I'm still stuck on transformation.
It's interesting, right? Because Spirit just told me, like, how beautiful that nothing is promised. Also, if struggle is promised, so is release. Because in struggle, there has to be moments of release. And maybe release doesn't equal relief, but it does promise something. Duality. But I think that's beautiful. Instead of having hope or faith, just knowing that if nothing is promised, I get to choose my movements as best as possible, or as worst as possible. I don't know. It depends on how you look at it. And then that tension, specifically in how it relates to anti-Blackness, anti-Indigeneity, because I kind of want us to stop focusing on whiteness or white supremacy. This is a little bit of a tangent, but I really think that, like, folks in power get off on us saying names. And I think the more, because, like, I say my name 3 times, and that is a spell, that is an incantation. I will show up in rooms where my name is spoken 3 times. So I think, what do we want to call into space? What are we trying to summon? What do y'all want to summon?
I'm feeling it here. I'm feeling it here. I'm feeling it here. I'm feeling it. You see these tears? Just like, Yeah, that's a beautiful question. Think about that.
Oh my gosh, yeah. What do we want to summon? My partner works in disability advocacy, and I've learned from her how that really translates into so like to think of disability in a very large way, as in like nobody is normal. And I would love to summon a world that is actually accessible to us all, but not just accessible, but that is like welcoming. And what that looks like, I mean, sometimes I see it in queer spaces. I think I've seen queer spaces that are just very, very welcoming to all different bodies. I think queer style I really love because it involves like just like being yourself and like colors and shapes and like putting things together in ways that just to feel like you and that other people aren't like pushing onto you or onto me. So I kind of think about like Carolyn, that maybe you wouldn't call it a rave. I'm going to call it a rave. Talking about it. I kind of think about that like in your mushroom outfit.
Oh my God,
like,
I love raves.
like maybe that would be a really welcoming world. And not rave as like a rave where like anybody could join.
Yeah. Now I'm thinking about going dancing, which is honestly like, the moments of release that that you touched on. I think that that's, something that feels like the moments of transformation, feels like the moments where you can kind of see or touch or get some semblance of knowing of what that other, what true freedom or what, a truly different world could feel like, because we only glimpse that so infrequently, I feel like. Weirdly, the thing that came up when you said, what do you want to summon right now, was tenderness, which I don't even know if I've said that word out loud ever. But like just that sense of like needing interconnection. Like it's not a choice. You know what I mean? This notion of, nothing is promised and everything is so uncertain, that puts me in a position of I have to be okay with the fact that I am connected to everyone and everything. There is no alternative to that. I actually remember, so I was married and we owned a house and we had two dogs and I had like a job that paid me like a kind of ridiculous amount of money, like $70,000 a year. And I remember when she and I broke up and I took a different job, I just changed everything about my life. And then I stood back for a second and I was like, oh, fuck. I don't have all the like, I don't have the person. I don't have the money. I don't have any of those safety nets. Like all I have is people now. Like all I have is my relationships. And that is like such a terrifying place to be. Because it's like all of the uncertainty all of the time. And it's like all of the tenderness. Like I am reliant on other human beings. Like I don't have any shell. Like I don't have any protection anymore, And I think that that's the way, the world that I want to live in is where none of us have shells. Oh my gosh, I'm sorry for this metaphor. That got real weird. But like not having that protective layer, because I think as white folks, we have all the shells. Like we are living inside of a shell all the time. And so we feel safe all the time in that kind of a way. And it's only when all of that gets stripped away that you're like, oh shit, this is the reality of being a human being. And not even just in our society, just in the biology of this ecosystem. You know what I mean? We are all soft, fragile beings and deeply connected to each other. And we like to pretend that that's not the case.
What do you feel like whiteness has made you or your bloodline give up? Like, what do you think are the sacrifices you've had to make consciously and unconsciously to support your whiteness?
I mean, the first thing for me I can think of is like the separation from my body. And yeah, I think of white feminism. There's this like strain of white feminism that is very much about like Pilates and yoga and being in touch with your body. So I'm not exactly talking about that. I think I'm talking about like really feeling the oppression and harm and hurt in this world, um, that I think whiteness doesn't want me to feel. Um, and I also recognize it's a huge privilege to be able to step outside of that. I think I have very little understanding or connection to my ancestors. I know very little about them. I think that we're initially from Ireland. I mean, I have red hair, and maybe like Scandinavian countries and England, but I'm not sure, and I don't really know what that past looks like. I have people in my family who do look at our past, but it's very much from this like white frame of mind. It's like our beautiful ancestors came over here on the Mayflower, blah blah blah. Yeah, so I think I have a very very small, like I have a large chosen family, but a very small biological family, and I think that it's not necessarily whiteness, but that feels related to whiteness for me, just because of like things I won't go into, but just like the way our family has moved around and stuff. And so I think like, yeah, I often feel very individualistic in a way that I don't want to. Like I want to know who my people are, and it's sometimes very, very hard and sad not to feel that I know that.
Yeah, I think similarly, like I said, my dad was born in Poland. And I think one of the things that was maybe not intentional, but certainly something that I mourn now that I'm older is that, like, I was never taught Polish. I think that my dad, hi, Dad, if you ever listen to this, there was some intentionality there of like, his dad worked in a Zenith factory and he went to college and, became an accountant. And then it was kind of this point of pride, I think, that, when you class jump in a family, that's what you do. But for us, I mean, for me, that meant that like we didn't stay in Chicago because my dad's job took us elsewhere. And that means that I didn't, learn. I wasn't around my grandparents very much. And even when I was, I didn't speak the language that they spoke. And so I think there was a whiteness, like assimilating to and being successful in this place, by the cultural norms that exist here, was some degree of a product of assimilating into whiteness. And yeah, it took me away from understanding, a lot about my direct heritage and ancestry. And the other thing I think that is super white, is I have a lot of anxiety. Like biologically, I have a lot of anxiety, but like the perfectionism and the like mental gymnastics that like I just am constantly going through. I think there's a whiteness aspect there that's really exhausting and infuriating. And I know people experience anxiety in other ways, because of the situation and the society that we live in that very much privileges me. But I think that there's a certain strain of whiteness that comes from this perfectionism and this notion that like there is a right way of doing things and it is the way that, we all have to do it. So I think that's the other thing that I think whiteness has, yeah, had an impact in that way.
Thank y'all for offering that up and really holding the questions I've been fielding at y'all. In baseball, I feel like I'm giving y'all some fast pitches with grit.
Thank you.
And y'all haven't been punting, so thank you. Why did I use a baseball metaphor?
I have no idea.
By a football metaphor.
Exactly. Right? Like, I don't even know what I'm talking about. I would love to just be able to close out with our like last meditation, using this prophecy, what rituals do you practice with other white people that move you towards the lighting of the eighth fire? What is your relationship to land, housing, and this idea of ownership?
I mean, this isn't the first thing I thought of just because we were talking about this, because Maria and I were on a bike ride together. And this isn't exclusively white people, but I think the ritual of moving our bodies together and experiencing the land as something that is, our relation, not our commodity. And we, in our work, Maria and I both do housing justice work, and we talk about, decommodifying housing and kind of nerdy words like that. But I think really this notion that like we're not even stewards of the land, because that's kind of patronizing. So I think the thing that I think of that feels the most, not to keep coming back to the word transformative, but to do with other white people, is to be in relationship to the land in ways that doesn't feel like a transaction. And that can be whether it's, when we're marching down University and it just feels like we are taking up space coming back together in ways that are just completely outside of this context of like any type of private ownership, in ways that doesn't even feel logical anymore, So yeah, I'm struggling to answer this one.
Yeah, I've been thinking about this. I have a group of friends. There are four of us that I've known. We're planning our 10-year trip. So I know, Tori, Melena, and Jen will probably share this podcast with you. So there's your little shout out. But I met them during my first month of college. And I think something that we have really tried to do together, especially my friend Tori and I, but really all four of us, is being lovingly and respectfully honest with each other and recognizing that the other person is capable of holding that honesty. And I grew up in predominantly white spaces where we were taught to just be very nice and not stir up trouble. And all of those things are ways of actually creating a culture of oppression. And so I think I've really worked to try to be more honest and trust other people to hold that honesty. And so I do that with my partner, who's also white. And so I think that's maybe one ritual, is exploring what it means to really see each other and respect each other in that way. I think, biking, speaking of the land, going camping with friends and doing so in a respectful way. I have a friend who is, I guess maybe she's a white woman who is managing, it gets tricky, but managing like a BIPOC queer collective, farming collective in Wisconsin. And so I like to go up there every so often, and she uses very respectful, often indigenous practices, and names those practices, and like really cares for the land and is in right relationship with the land in a way that is preparing for our continual apocalypse that we're in. And so being out there with her is also really special.
I'm not sure if this is spirit or ego, but I want to ask y'all opinions about mutual aid and resource distribution.
I guess that's another example. I'm part of Resource Generation, which is for people 35 and under who come from a background of class privilege. And so often it's white people in those spaces because that's how class privilege is set up. And I've been thinking about this question recently. I think maybe sometimes mutual aid can be co-opted as a way not to transform our systems, where it's almost thought of as like charity, like like kind of church-based charity or something. And so what I've been thinking about is, what could mutual aid actually be and look like, where it's not just me sharing like kind of the top frosting of my income, but actually like really thinking about like, what are ways that I can share my housing and ways that it's not mine, and kind of give up this idea of ownership. And I don't have clear answers for that right now. I live in an apartment, but it's still like a lease under my name. Like there are things that a lot of things I own. I own a car, so I don't have a clear answer to that, but it's something that I still try to think about and try to practice in ways that I can. I think like when friends are sick, I really try to like be there for them and pick up supplies for them. And I don't know how much that's going to transform anything, but it's like a small way of kind of like thinking about my health and sharing my health, and like, okay, I'm feeling well, so I'm going to share this energy that I have by being there for things.
Yeah, I think the thing that comes up for me in terms of resource is definitely time. Like I don't have a car or a house or much money, but I do have time, and I do have um, power in various spaces. So redistributing that as much as I can, in terms of resource redistribution, and mutual aid. I'm really enamored with the concept that Dr. Sharice Burdenstelli talks about, mutual comradeship, where it's inherently more relational. Like the word aid in and of itself, is so problematic. But mutual comradeship means that I'm sharing the risk with you. I'm not just giving something that I have away, which is easy, I mean, it's not easy, but it's, you're not implicated in the same kind of way. So I think that's a much more helpful concept. And she has a book coming out on that topic. So I really appreciate her thought leadership in that regard, to kind of start to maybe turn us in a potentially different direction on that. Yeah, she's really cool. Everyone should look her up.
Right now, I'm thinking about Dr. Joy James and how Dr. James talks a lot about like, it's really important, you know what I mean, that we get clear with our words, right? And to recognize like plurality, pluralism in anything, right? And there's so many things that were named, right? Right now, I'm thinking about co-optation, and this idea of co-optation, this idea of elite capture, this idea of people who have relative privilege, you know what I mean? Privilege relative to the group in which they are compared to, right? How they take from the source, how they take pain and knowledge, right? From, the people who are directly experiencing it, take it, parcel it out, repackage it, sell something back to the people, or vibrations back to the people in a way, right, that allows them to protect their own accumulations, right? And so I think about one of us named Fire, right, and the fire at the 3rd precinct, and how, there's many ways to see fire, right? Fire can be seen as something that is really necessary, right? Or fire is something that is seen as threatening to something that someone's trying to protect. This was not intended to be named, but it came up today for whatever reason, because spirit be moving, I guess, We could have let the fires keep going in 2020, but there was something that captured. We know that elite capture happened. There's many lessons there that could be metabolized.
Let's say, like, when people look at a post and they're like, too long didn't read. What would be like your closing statement if someone was like, I just need to skip to the end?
Thank you.
Idea like for white folks in particular, too long day.
I feel like always show up and don't be afraid to make mistakes. And also make sure that you have processes to learn from those mistakes.
Mine would be, we all have to get out of our heads. White people especially need to get out of our heads and into our bodies, which again, the irony of me saying this after years of being so disembodied and still. So yeah, I guess that's a, a learning edge for me too, that I think is potentially helpful to a lot of folks. And I like someone who's kind of a white woman, anti-racist mentor of mine, has a podcast called How to Make Love, but she was talking about, I will be, I will not move forward if I'm scared of doing harm, because I will do harm. I just need to be confident that I have both the capacity in terms of being uncomfortable and the processes and the commitment to address them when it happens. And so, yeah, that's scary, but I also think real.
Thank you so much for this conversation.
I just wrote down a couple of things, and I think I'll just share that. Suffer, release, repeat, hold honest. Ashe.
Thank you. Ashe.
Thank you so much to Maria and Carolyn for sharing their perspectives with us today. It cannot be easy really interrogating what it means to be privileged within a marginalized activism space. So we give thanks. To support our guests, please check out United Renters for Justice. You can check out their website at inquilindxs.org. You can also support by connecting with Love First Community Engagement, Safety for All St. Paul, and supporting Chantel Allen, who is a young person running for the school board. To support Nexus and our podcast, visit our website, Nexus Community Partners, at nexuscp.org. That's nexuscp.org. The NLP Alumni Podcast is available on the Nexus website and anywhere you like to listen to your podcasts. Again, let's breathe together and realize that liberation is in fact possible for all. Ashe.
I am the one, really the one. I am the one, really